Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our first finance session. We are doing these every week in the summer. Finance is going to be on Wednesday. We're going to have supply chain sessions on Tuesdays. And on Thursdays, we're having our master interplanners come in and do some workshops on model optimization. These are great sessions to just have access to our experts, ask your questions, bring your curiosities, and we'll help you solve some problems that you're dealing with in the day-to-day. So today we have our finance team with us, led by Mark Chisholm, and we're diving into the transparency in product and customer profitability. So all of these guys have actually done these models in global companies, so they have a lot of expertise to share. Mark is going to walk through the model to start, and then we're going to open it up to our panel to talk a little bit about using this in the real life. So Mark, go ahead and take it away whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Elena. So here's the panelists for today. And really, let's start off with just a quick overview of the agenda. So what we're going to do is talk about the business problem associated with customer and product profitability transparency, walk you through a brief solution overview of how the Anaplan platform addresses it, and then we'll open it up for questions. So what's the business problem around this? Well, it's really all about the following questions, which is, how do we know what customers and products are profitable? And if we knew that, could we better target our investments towards that? And also, when contracts come up for negotiation, how can we improve our position in that? If we knew which customers and products were profitable, then potentially that could affect those negotiations. And also, how can we improve accountability and drive transparency? Well, transparency really leads to accountability. So accountability is kind of the outcome of a more transparent process. So how do we make this whole process more transparent and ultimately result in people taking ownership and being accountable? So what I've got here is just a quick example of this in the Anaplan planning platform. And just maybe for those who've not seen Anaplan before, it's a pure in the cloud planning platform where you can be anywhere in the world and pick the device of your choice, the browser of your choice, log into anaplan.com and be presented with a landing page based on your security rights. And in this example here, we're looking at a dashboard that allows us to allocate things like overhead to product categories. In this particular example, the ultimate outcome of this is a full P&L by customer. So if I just go to this particular dashboard and scroll down a little bit, what you're seeing here is basically a high-level P&L, which is showing us things like revenue, cost of revenue, down to margin, and then ultimately down to EBITDA. Now, there's kind of differing schools of thought in terms of making decisions for products and customers based on contribution margin or based on margin and based on full profitability. And again, there's pros and cons to each. If we look at just pure margin, well, that's really something that is directly traceable to each customer and to each product, right? So you have your direct costs, and those go directly. That can be identified or tagged to a customer and product, go directly against those customer and products, and therefore you're looking at a pure margin measure, if you will, and then you can make decisions based on margin for that. And that in that case, it's the pro is it's a pure metric, but the con is that it's really not taking into account the other ancillary costs that go into supporting that product and customer. So you're really not getting a true picture of the profitability, and so you really have to bring in other costs to be able to get that picture. So so what you're going to see is an example of additional line items here being populated as a result of the attribution process, if you will, from product category to product and ultimately to channel and customer. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at this first step of the allocation. Now, this is an example of a multi-step process where essentially what you've got business units that are directly supporting that the whole that side of the business that ultimately results in revenue from products and customers. So we've got IT, procurement, and facilities. and they've got certain expenses that they've accumulated. And in this case, what you're able to do is decide ultimately like how those are going to be allocated. So yes, this is an allocation process. And, one of the cons of going below margin is ultimately you're getting into an allocation process, which can be viewed or interpreted by some as being somewhat arbitrary. But ultimately there can be business drivers behind it that, that make it less, more scientific, more mathematical, and less arbitrary, if you will. And we're going to talk about that more in a follow-up webinar where we get into cost to serve. I'm not going to focus a lot on the mechanics of this process. I more want to focus on how Anaplan drives the transparency that leads to accountability. But we'll get into the mechanics in a future webinar about how you can actually inject more science and math into that process to again take some of that arbitrary nature of that allocations tend to be. So in this case here, what we're going to do is we're going to base the first round of allocations on 50% headcount, 50% time study. And again, you also have the ability to affect or affect these rules as well directly on the dashboard by deciding I want to allocate to these categories and not these ones. So you can actually do that. And you can also add new allocation rules on the fly. So the Anaplan platform, one of the things that makes it so strong is the fact that it's business user owned. As well, which means that you can actually be having business users creating and maintaining allocation rules rather than having that fall into the IT realm, if you will. But so what we want to get to is a situation where we want to see these costs being allocated out first to category. So now we'll just go ahead and activate these rules. And you'll notice just by doing that, you're seeing the amounts being allocated out, in real time as we're doing that. And you're immediately seeing that now being reflected at the category level. And again, another strength of this platform is the fact that these calculations are being done in memory and they're immediate. So you can immediately see the downstream implications of any assumptions or changes you make or decisions you make on the upstream side, and you see those things immediately. And you also can see that there's also some checks around whether things are being duplicated and whether things are fully allocated. And so that's another thing that this platform does, is that it is able to validate that data in real time and give you that feedback. So that right now we've gone to product category. Let's take things to the next level and actually move to product. So product rolls up to category. So now what we're doing is we're taking amounts that were not by product category, pushing them out to product category, and then now down a hierarchy within that product category down to the individual product level. And you'll see here that we can again decide which categories are being allocated to which product lines, determining that allocation basis. And again, if I wanted to make this 50% and make the time study 30%, I can easily do that. And then just by activating these rules, you can see those amounts being allocated out, in real time, and immediately being able to see those amounts reflected, by product and by category. And if I wanted to change this back to 60% and make this, 20%, you can see that reaction, that immediate reaction in real time. And that's the power of this in-memory platform. So as we're doing that, we move to customer and channel. And then as we scroll down, we can immediately see that, we're starting to update our full P&L, by customer. And what's missing now is sort of that last step allocation to get to a full level profitability. Because you can see right now for this particular customer, this customer looks actually pretty good, right? We're making $350,000, but does that reflect reality? And so what you're also able to do is, picks whether there's a channel specific mapping. So is this going to a digital channel? Is it going to telephone or brand or other types of channels, whatever? You can have that channel approach. You can also pick your channel allocation drivers. So for sales, we want to make this based on, let's say, transaction volume. So as we do that, you can see that the allocations have started to occur. Right now, we're seeing that there's an error because we're not fully allocated, and that's because we haven't picked the rest of our drivers. So maybe sales administration is also going to be based on transaction volume. But then as we get to marketing, maybe that's going to be based on revenue, as well as customer service, as well as finance. Those are also going to be based on revenue. And now Anaplan has now fully allocated out everything 100%. And as we scroll down, we can see the makeup of those allocations to channel, and then ultimately those channels down to customers, and then ultimately down to a full P&L. And you could see that, while we were potentially, making making a positive margin on this particular customer, we're actually not making money on this particular customer. So this is how incorporating all the possible cost of supporting this line of business can lead to potentially different outcomes if you base your decision on margin versus overall profitability. And what you're able to do also is slice through the different dimensions and take a look at our different customers. So you can see, okay, in this particular case here in customer one, we actually have a positive margin, so that's good. But as we get to customer two, you can see we have a negative income. And if we take a look at customer three, this is a bit of a unique case, because an interesting case, because you can see we have a positive margin, but ultimately once we consider all the costs and the drivers the resources that this particular customer is consuming within the organization, ultimately it's not a profitable customer. So this is one candidate that we would look to say, well, margin doesn't necessarily encompass the whole picture. And now we've got something to go back to this customer with when, potentially contracts come up for renewal or what have you, where we could actually renegotiate and share with them the whole picture, or give them some reasons as to why things need to be renegotiated, because ultimately they're not profitable for us. And now that we know sort of the allocation results, what we also can do is actually start drilling into this a little bit and seeing, well, this direct SG&A, why is this number this number? Well, you can actually right click and utilize another capability within the platform that allows you to actually start drilling down and start understanding like where these allocation results are coming from. And you can actually just do a free form drill down. Why is sales 41,000? Let's drill down a little bit further. Here's a good example, right? That amount is based on 33% of revenue. Right. So you're able to drill back from a summarized number down into the business drivers and assumptions that are driving that calculated result. And now what you are able to have is a discussion as to why is it 33%? Well, it's because that's the transaction volume that you're driving. That's the driver. And so now you're able to have a conversation about whether that makes sense, whether it's logical. What Anaplan allows you to do is actually start that conversation. And instead of having that sort of classic disagreement of, well, I don't agree with these numbers, the person affected or the group affected by this able to drill down on a self-service basis and understand what's driving the allocation and then have that discussion. So that's really what I wanted to share with you today. And again, more on the mechanics of the actual process itself in a future webinar. But for now, what I'd like to do is open it up to our panelists to provide some of their personal insights on this topic. So, Brendan?
One thing as we were going through this demo, I noticed is this would have been really helpful in a previous role of mine at a national retail company where we had to do store profitability reports. 600 plus retail stores, having a tool that could easily page through all of the different retail stores, different markets, would have been really helpful to see the allocated cost, because it was a very time-consuming manual process in Excel to get to that. In addition, it'd be really helpful for some of those market analyses when we were looking to open up new stores in different markets and seeing how cannibalization would have impacted profitability of other stores as well as the whole market. So I think it's a really powerful tool that can be used across, multiple different types of businesses.
Yeah, and one thing I'd add as well is that, this has broad applicability as well. If we consider things like transfer pricing, where decisions are made based on taxation levels in different jurisdictions, and ultimately that transfer pricing process requires an allocation of things like sales and cost of sales and so on to other, from one jurisdiction to another to ultimately affect the effective tax rate of the organization. So this type of process is often performed by organizations engaging in things like transfer pricing practices as well. And that's something that Anaplan can easily do as well. We'd now like to, thanks Brendan as well for that contribution. And we'd now like to open it up to questions.
Yeah, so we do have a couple questions in the chat. One is, can this be expanded to include accounts other than overhead, such as cost of sales?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, what you're seeing in this particular example is just a narrow sort of subset of accounts, if you will, looking at primarily overhead accounts, but it can be easily expanded to include all different kinds of P&L line items as well.
Great. There's also one more. It says, who typically owns and maintains the allocation rules?
Yeah, great question. And that really speaks to another core strength of the Anaplan platform is its business user ownership and maintenance, which means that IT is really doesn't necessarily have to own anything beyond just the traditional sort of security apparatus, if you will. In Anaplan, it's a pure business-owned and managed platform, which means that business users, as you saw me do when I was selecting the different allocation bases, is able to create their own their own allocation rules, set the bases for those, see the results, make changes, and add, and again, add and maintain rules as needed without requiring any more technical expertise than it is to point and click.
Can this also include an override process to account for like extraordinary or events or circumstances where, like, say, a natural disaster, a hurricane in Florida or some such, to adjust an allocation when you know that there's something that would cause that to allocate incorrectly?
Yeah, great question, Michael. Yes, absolutely. So, as you saw me sort of make those changes, you can also have an override any kind of assumptions that you need with an Anaplan, and you can do that directly on the dashboards. And what's great about that is that the override can be isolated from the original assumptions, so you can actually have an audit trail of the changes that were made to those assumptions and perhaps even the reasons behind them as well.
Excellent. Thank you.
Welcome.
All righty. So we'll wrap it up and we'll see you next week. Thanks, guys, for all of your input.